He didn't just walk away from his pregnant wife. He walked away while she was screaming in pain, while doctors rushed in and out of the delivery room, while a nurse begged him to stay just 5 more minutes. And he did it for another woman. By the time Evelyn Carter realized her husband was gone, the bedsheets were soaked, her body was shaking, and her phone lay just out of reach on the metal tray beside her. She called his name once, then again. No answer. Daniel Carter wasn't stuck in traffic. He wasn't dealing with an emergency. He was standing in the hospital hallway, whispering into his phone to his rich boss, the woman who had been promising him a faster way into the life he thought he deserved. "Today?" he asked her quietly, eyes flicking back toward the delivery room door. "Yes," Margaret Hale said on the other end. "The announcement can't move again. I need you beside me." He closed his eyes for a second, then breathed, "I understand." They hadn't arranged this in a panic. The civil ceremony paperwork had been filed days earlier. The engagement announcement was already scheduled. All that was left was for Daniel to show up on her arm when the cameras started rolling. Daniel went back into the room, looked at his wife just once, and said words that would split her life in half. He thought of the cameras, the statement already drafted in his name, the way Margaret had said, "I need you beside me." If he stayed, he might lose all of it. If he left, at least one version of his future would stay intact. "I can't do this anymore," he said. "I can't do this anymore." No explanation, no real apology, no goodbye to the child being born. He left her there on delivery day to go stand beside Power at the announcement of his new life. What Daniel didn't know, what he never bothered to ask, was that just hours earlier, from a small private office attached to the hospital, Evelyn had given final confirmation on a $200 billion global merger agreements she had already signed weeks before. Not her personal net worth, but the total value of a generational trust she quietly controlled. The deal was wrapped in ironclad confidentiality agreements that legally barred her from telling anyone outside a tiny list of approved names, including her husband. He thought she was financially dependent. He thought pregnancy made her weak. He thought marrying his wealthy boss meant winning. While Evelyn lay stitched, exhausted, holding her newborn alone, while hospital staff quietly noted his absence in their charts. While, over the next few days, Daniel smiled under bright lights with champagne in his hand as the engagement announcement hit the business press. Something far more dangerous than anger was forming in Evelyn's mind. Not tears, not begging, not revenge fueled by rage, documentation, timing, and a truth that would surface in the most public, irreversible way possible. Because when the woman you abandon at her weakest moment turns out to be the power you walked away from, the fall is never private. And what Evelyn did next didn't just shock him. It destroyed everything he thought he was building. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you're watching without subscribing, it's like standing in the room while someone is underestimated and saying nothing. When you subscribe, you stand with every woman who was dismissed, every partner who stayed silent instead of reckless, and every person who chose patience, strategy, and truth over shouting, while others revealed their own cruelty. The phone vibrated so sharply, it startled her breath. Evelyn Carter froze in the middle of the living room, one hand braced against the back of a chair, the other resting on the heavy curve of her pregnant belly. For a brief second, fear flashed through her, not panic, not pain, but the kind of alertness that came from knowing something important had just moved without asking permission. The screen lit up. Unknown caller, legal oversight, priority. She didn't answer. Instead, Evelyn slowly exhaled and slid the phone face down onto the table, as if silence itself were a decision. The house around her was calm, almost too calm. No music, no television, just the faint ticking of a wall clock and the soft sound of her own breathing. At 32 years old, Evelyn looked like someone the world would never pause for. Loose clothes, hair pulled back without effort. A gentle face that made people assume she needed protecting. Most people saw her and thought ordinary. They never asked deeper questions. Evelyn had learned early that being overlooked was not a weakness, it was cover. She walked slowly to the desk near the window and opened a slim leather folder. Inside were old paper documents, yellowed at the edges, organized with careful precision. Seals embossed into the pages caught the light. Signatures overlapped in ink that had faded but never lost authority. Anyone else might have thought they were relics. Evelyn knew better. She ran her fingers over the pages, not with pride, but with responsibility. A voice echoed in her memory, calm and measured. Evelyn learned early that the most dangerous kind of power is the kind no one sees. The memory pulled her backward in time. She was younger then, barely in her 20s, sitting at the far end of a long table polished to a mirror shine. Around her sat men and women twice her age, their voices low, their words heavy with numbers that felt unreal. Billions spoken casually, futures discussed like chess pieces. She had said very little that day, only nodded when asked, only listened when warned. And then there was her mother. Evelyn's mother had been composed in a way that never demanded attention. She spoke once, and the room went quiet. "If people know what you carry," her mother had said evenly, "they will only love the weight, not you." That sentence had shaped Evelyn's life. What Evelyn carried was not sudden, not earned overnight, and not stolen from luck. She was the sole executor and final decision holder of a generational investment trust. Northbridge Legacy Trust, built quietly over decades. Energy corridors, infrastructure projects, defense-linked manufacturing, long-term concessions layered so deeply into legal structures that they survived market crashes, leadership changes, and time itself. The trust was not flashy. It did not seek headlines. It moved through proxies, holding companies, and silence. On paper, the public only ever saw corporate names. In sealed registers and restricted filings, there was one, Evelyn Carter. She had been trained for this role from the moment her mother realized she was different, not louder, not bolder, but steadier. She learned to read contracts before she read novels. She learned patience before confidence. And most importantly, she learned one rule that never bent: never merge power with love. That was why she married Daniel. Daniel Carter, 34, was not wealthy when she met him. He was ambitious, polite, and hungry in a way that felt human, not greedy. He worked hard, talked about building a future, and loved her without asking questions about what she didn't say. He knew she did some work with the family office, but the specifics were blurred behind NDAs and her habit of answering softly, "It's boring legal stuff. Nothing exciting." The trust paid her a comfortable but modest personal stipend by design. The rest stayed locked inside long-term projects. With Daniel, Evelyn could be small on purpose. She could cook, laugh, worry about ordinary bills, talk about mortgage rates and car repairs. She could be a wife instead of a gatekeeper. Her marriage was not an escape. It was humility by choice. A door clicked open behind her. Daniel passed through the room, already on his phone, his brow tense. He didn't look at the documents on the desk. He didn't notice the leather folder. His steps were fast, distracted, like someone already late to something more important. "Running back out," he said without stopping. "Work stuff." Margaret moved a meeting. Evelyn smiled softly. "Drive safe." He nodded, eyes still glued to his screen, and the door closed behind him. The silence returned. Evelyn stood there for a moment longer, then carefully closed the folder and slid it into a drawer. She lowered herself into a chair, one hand pressing against her stomach as the baby shifted inside her. Her face softened. "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too." The phone vibrated again. Legal oversight priority. She stared at it this time. This call was not routine. It meant approvals had aligned. It meant signatures had cleared on the other side. It meant something decades in motion was reaching its last gate, one that would fall right around her due date. Still, she didn't answer. Evelyn leaned back, eyes drifting toward the door Daniel had just walked through. Something about his distance lingered in the room longer than his presence. He had been leaving more often, staying out later, smiling less at home, and more at his phone. She told herself it was stress. She told herself trust meant patience. Her phone stopped vibrating. Evelyn closed her eyes, unaware that while she sat quietly in that room, pregnant, overlooked, underestimated forces far larger than her marriage were locking into place. And somewhere beyond that closed door, Daniel was already drifting toward a life that would soon collide with a truth he never thought to ask about. She would answer the call later. By then, everything would already be moving. Daniel Carter's hands were shaking before the meeting even started. He hid it by tightening his grip on the pen, forcing his fingers to still as the conference room slowly filled. At 34, Daniel looked successful on paper-tailored suit, sharp haircut, a title that impressed people at dinner parties. Assistant director, fast track, future partner. Inside, something brittle rattled every time the room went quiet. The door opened. Margaret Hale walked in without urgency, without apology, without looking at anyone for permission. Early 40s, tall, composed, precise in the way only people who had never needed approval could be. Margaret Hale was Daniel's boss, the chief executive of Hale International, the company where he had clawed his way up for years. She controlled promotions, futures, and exits with a calm smile. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Power sat on her like a tailored coat. The room stood without being asked. Daniel stood too fast. Margaret didn't acknowledge him at first. She placed her folder on the table, glanced at the numbers on the screen, the risk models for an incoming strategic capital partner everyone had been whispering about, and nodded once. "Good work," she said, addressing the room. Then her eyes landed on Daniel. "Especially you." The praise hit him like oxygen. He'd been the one staying late, rebuilding projections, massaging the models to show how quickly the firm could grow if the new infrastructure funding came through. No one knew who the mysterious capital partner would be, only that it involved sovereign funds, generational trusts, and numbers he'd never seen up close before. She dismissed everyone else with a small wave of her hand. When the door closed, the room felt smaller. Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying Daniel the way investors studied risk without emotion, but with interest. "Men like you shouldn't live small lives, Daniel." The sentence was quiet, precise. It didn't sound like encouragement, it sounded like permission. Daniel swallowed. No one had ever said that to him before. Not his father, not his friends, not even Evelyn. With Evelyn, life was gentle, predictable, safe. She cared if he was tired. She asked how his day went. She talked about prenatal vitamins and baby names. Margaret's words hit a different place, sharp, electric, touching the part of him that hated watching other men buy houses he couldn't afford yet. She continued casually, flipping through her folder. "You work hard, you stay loyal, you don't complain." A pause. "That's rare." Daniel nodded, unsure what to say. Margaret glanced up again, her gaze steady. "Some people are born adjacent to power and never even realize it." The words lingered. Daniel looked down at the table, heat creeping into his face. He thought of his small house, his careful budget, his pregnant wife, folding baby clothes in quiet rooms. He thought of how close he sat to something bigger, yet how far it still felt. Margaret closed the folder. "We'll talk later," she said. "Not if, when." As Daniel left the room, he felt taller and smaller, both at once. Margaret remained seated, watching the door long after it closed. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes calculated distance, timing, and leverage. The mysterious capital partner would give her the expansion she wanted. Men like Daniel were either ballast or currency. At home that night, the house smelled faintly of laundry soap and warm food. Evelyn stood near the kitchen counter, one hand resting on her belly, the other holding a mug she hadn't touched. Pregnancy softened her movements but sharpened her awareness. She noticed the way Daniel came in distracted, the way his jacket stayed on too long, the way his smile arrived late. "Long day?" she asked gently. Daniel nodded too fast. "Yeah, just work stuff. Big things are happening." She studied his face. "The same project you've been working on?" He shrugged, already pulling out his phone. "Kind of. There's this huge capital deal coming. Could change everything." Evelyn knew exactly what he meant. She had seen Hale International buried in one of the merger charts, just a line in a long structure diagram. She also knew she wasn't allowed to connect that line to him out loud. She handed him a plate. "You didn't answer my messages." "I was busy," he said, thumbs flicking over the screen. "Sorry." The word felt thin. They sat at the table, the silence stretching longer than usual. Evelyn tried to fill it with normal things, the baby's checkup, a small ache in her back, a question about the nursery shelf. When she mentioned the baby, Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't meet her eyes. "That's great," he said. "We'll figure it out." Evelyn watched him carefully. This wasn't anger. It wasn't cruelty. It was avoidance. The kind that grew when someone began to believe their life was being decided without them. She reached for his hand. Daniel hesitated just a second too long before taking it. That hesitation stayed with her. Later that night, Daniel stood alone in the hallway, staring at his reflection in the darkened mirror. He looked like a man at the edge of something, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. His phone buzzed. A message preview lit the screen. M.H. Tomorrow. Private conversation. No reschedule. He didn't reply. He didn't delete it either. From the bedroom, Evelyn watched his silhouette linger in the hallway longer than necessary. She felt a quiet shift in the air, not a rupture, but a tilt. Something subtle had changed direction. Daniel finally turned off the light and walked away from the mirror. Behind him, unseen, his reflection stayed uncertain, divided, and already drifting toward a choice he hadn't yet admitted to himself. And somewhere else, power waited patiently for him to step closer. The phone rang once. Evelyn Carter answered. Before the second ring could sound, her breath already shallow, her hand gripping the edge of the small office desk. The hospital had let her use, just for paperwork. She had scheduled her final review there on purpose, close enough to maternity to be safe if anything happened. Yes, she said quietly. There was no greeting on the other end, no small talk, no congratulations. Only a familiar, controlled voice, calm in a way that suggested power had already been secured. All approvals are finalized, the man said. The Northbridge Sovereign Infrastructure merger is complete. The total consolidated value stands at just under $200 billion. For a brief moment, the room felt weightless. Evelyn didn't sit down. She didn't smile. She didn't close her eyes in relief. She simply stood there, listening, as if the words needed time to settle into the walls around her. 3 additional voices joined the call, each one known to her, each one bound by confidentiality clauses thicker than any contract Daniel had ever signed. Legal representatives, oversight council, people who existed in the quiet spaces where governments, institutions, and legacy wealth intersected. None of them raised their voices. None of them used dramatic language. They didn't need to. The deal they spoke of consolidated multiple sovereign-aligned portfolios that had been moving separately for decades: energy corridors, infrastructure networks, long-term defense manufacturing commitments, slow, deliberate, immovable power, the kind that shaped futures without announcing itself. One of the acquiring structures now owned a controlling stake in Hale International, Daniel's company. On the public filings, it would look like an institutional investor. In the sealed registers, the final sign-off would trace back to Evelyn. Evelyn had been the final gate. Her signature, placed on the main agreements weeks earlier, had triggered the last sequence of approvals. Today was about confirmations and counter-signatures, the moment everything transitioned from pending to effective. She had insisted on scheduling it close to her due date, after certain medical milestones, not out of fear, but out of discipline. She had learned long ago that timing was as important as authority. "You'll receive the confirmation packet within the hour," one of the representatives said. "As agreed, disclosure of your role remains limited to the board and oversight council of the relevant entities." "Yes," Evelyn replied. "No deviations." Of course. The separation between her personal life and her fiduciary role had never been optional. It was written into the trust itself. Non-disclosure agreements prevented information from reaching even spouses, not because of mistrust, but because power survived only when protected from emotion. Evelyn had insisted on that clause herself. It felt colder now that it applied to her own marriage. The call ended. The silence that followed was deeper than before. Evelyn rested her palm against her stomach, feeling the slow, steady movement inside. Her child shifted, as if aware something had changed. "I know," she whispered. "I felt it too." She walked to the small window and looked out at the hospital parking lot. Nothing looked different. No sirens, no applause. No signs that something worth hundreds of billions had just locked into place because of her. That was how it was supposed to be. Her phone lit up again almost immediately, email notifications stacking quietly at the top of the screen. Subject lines marked confidential, final confirmation, secured. She didn't open them. Instead, her mind drifted to Daniel. She wondered what he was doing at that exact moment. Sitting in a meeting, walking beside someone who made him feel important. Maybe hearing hints of the anonymous capital partner that had just become their largest shareholder, never realizing it was his wife. She wondered if he would ever ask her about the calls she didn't take. Evelyn turned away from the window. The first pain hit without warning. It was sharp, low, immediate. Her breath caught as she instinctively grabbed the back of a chair, her fingers tightening as another wave followed, stronger than the first. She had read the books, she had attended the classes. She knew the difference between discomfort and certainty. This was not a warning, this was beginning. She stayed still, eyes closed, riding the pain until it eased. When it passed, she straightened slowly, pressing both hands against her belly. "So soon," she murmured. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she checked the screen. A reminder from her obstetrician flashed. Appointment, 39 weeks check-in today, which she was clearly not going to make. Evelyn breathed out, then scrolled to Daniel's name and pressed call. He answered on the second ring, his voice low and rushed. "Hey, I'm about to head into something. Can we—" "It's time," Evelyn said, gripping the desk. "I'm at the hospital already." It started. Silence, then a sharp inhale. Okay, I'll be there. Just give me a bit." Margaret pulled something forward, "But I'll come as soon as I can." Another contraction cut through her. She leaned forward. "Daniel," she said, jaw clenched. "I need you here." He hesitated. "I'm coming," he said finally. "Text me the room once they admit you." She ended the call and slid the phone into her bag. As she made her way down the corridor toward maternity, one hand gripping the rail, another contraction tightened her breath. Power and vulnerability moved together now, inseparable. By the time Daniel reached the hospital, he would be standing at the edge of two lives, and he could only stand inside one. The pain came hard and fast, stealing Evelyn Carter's breath before she could prepare for it. Her body folded forward as the contraction tore through her, sharp and unforgiving, and the room blurred at the edges. A nurse rushed to her side, steadying her shoulders, speaking calmly, but the words barely reached her. Evelyn clutched the edge of the hospital bed, her knuckles white, her heart pounding not just from pain but from a growing fear she couldn't name. Daniel was there, physically. He stood near the window, hospital visitor band around his wrist, jacket still on, his phone in his hand. He'd arrived flustered and out of breath, muttering something about traffic and a huge meeting. But now that he was in the room, he looked out instead of at her. Every few seconds, his screen lit up. Each time it did, his jaw tightened. "Daniel," Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking despite her effort to stay calm. "I need you here." He turned toward her, startled, as if he had forgotten where he was. He nodded too quickly and stepped closer, placing a hand on the bed rail. His touch was light, uncertain, already pulling away. "I'm here," he said. I need to keep an eye on this. It's work. It's important." Before she could ask who it was, his phone rang again. He looked at the screen. Margaret Hale. His face drained of color. He glanced at Evelyn, then at the nurse, then back at the phone. "I'll be right back," he said. He stepped into the hallway. The door didn't close all the way. Evelyn lay back, breathing through the pain, staring at the ceiling tiles as another contraction rolled in. The rhythm of her body demanded focus, but her mind drifted toward the open doorway. She could hear pieces of his voice. "Yes." A pause. "I understand." Another pause, longer this time. "Today?" "But she's—" Her heart sank. Something in his tone was different. Not panic, not guilt, decision. The nurse glanced toward the door, then back at Evelyn. "You're doing great," she said softly. "Just keep breathing for me, okay?" Minutes passed, or seconds. Time bent under pain. The door opened. Daniel came back in, but he was no longer the same man who had left. His face was pale. His eyes wouldn't quite meet hers. He stood at the foot of the bed, hands clenched, as if holding himself together took all the strength he had. Evelyn searched his face. "What is it?" she asked. He swallowed. "I can't do this anymore." The words landed heavier than the contraction. For a moment, Evelyn thought she had misheard him. The room felt suddenly distant, like she was underwater. "Do what?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. Us. I can't." There was no explanation. No apology, just exhaustion, as if the decision had been made long before today and he had run out of excuses not to say it. "Daniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm in labor." "I know," he replied. For a brief second, something flickered across his face, fear, shame, something close to regret, but it passed too quickly. "Margaret." She moved the announcement up, he said, words tumbling out now. "Everything is tied to today, the new investors, the expansion, my position." If I don't show up, he stopped himself. He didn't need to finish the sentence. The math was obvious. Career on one side, wife and child on the other. I'm sorry, he said, but the words were hollow even as they left his mouth. If I leave her standing there, I lose everything. Evelyn stared at him, the truth slotting into place. The late nights, the messages, the way he looked at his phone like it held the life he wanted. Everything except them. You already did, she said quietly. Another contraction surged through her body, stronger than the last, and this time there was no hand to hold, no familiar voice to anchor her. Daniel stepped back toward the door. Someone will come, he added, as if logistics were the problem. Your mom's on her way, right? Or a friend. You won't be alone. The nurse stepped closer to the door, her brows drawn. Sir, she said firmly, she's progressing fast. Just stay 5 more minutes. Please. Daniel's hand tightened on the handle. He didn't look back. I can't, he said quietly. Yes, she will, the nurse muttered under her breath. But Evelyn answered honestly. No, she said, it's just me. The nurse hesitated, then placed a firm, steadying hand on Evelyn's shoulder. We're here, she said loudly enough for Daniel to hear. You won't be alone in this. He heard. He still walked out. The door closed behind him. Another contraction hit so hard it blurred the edges of the room. Evelyn instinctively reached toward the metal tray where her phone lay, but her fingers fell short. Daniel? She called once, her voice cracking. Silence. Daniel. Again, weaker. No answer. The sound echoed. Evelyn stared at the empty doorway, her chest tight, her breath uneven. Another contraction tore through her, and she doubled over, gripping the rails. Okay, deep breaths, Evelyn, the nurse said, moving quickly. You're stronger than you feel right now. Focus on the baby. We've got you. Doctors moved in and out. Voices gave instructions. Time collapsed into a cycle of pain, effort, and the thin thread of focus she clung to so she wouldn't think about the man who had just chosen a press conference over his child. Not once did Daniel return. Not once did her phone light up with his name. When the baby's cry finally filled the room, sharp and real, Evelyn felt tears spill down her cheeks, not from joy, not from pain, but from a grief so deep it stole the breath from her chest. They placed her child in her arms. She looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled, eyes still closed, completely unaware of the world it had entered. I'm here, Evelyn whispered. I'm not going anywhere. She meant it. As the room settled into quiet, as machines beeped softly and the nurses stepped back, Evelyn reached for her phone with shaking fingers. Habit, instinct, hope she didn't know which. The screen lit up. Not Daniel. A small, unfamiliar notification glowed at the top from a financial news app she rarely opened. Market alert. Hale International CEO schedules personal milestone announcement with senior executive. Her heart skipped. The betrayal had already happened. But something else, something she didn't yet understand, was about to make it permanent. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. And the world was about to see what Daniel had chosen to walk away from. The television flickered on with a soft click. A nurse had switched it on earlier, leaving the remote on the tray in case you want some noise. And now a new segment rolled in automatically as the channel shifted to live business news. The sudden sound cut through the quiet hospital room, making Evelyn flinch. She held her newborn closer to her chest. Her body was still shaking from exhaustion, her arms weak, her head heavy, but her instincts were awake now in a way pain hadn't fully managed. The screen brightened. A familiar voice filled the room, the polished tone of a business news anchor, calm and confident, as if nothing in the world had broken apart hours earlier. Evelyn reached for the remote, intending to mute it, but the anchor spoke before she could. Breaking news this afternoon, the anchor said. Hale International has released a personal statement from CEO Margaret Hale, confirming her engagement to company executive Daniel Carter following a private civil ceremony and announcement earlier today. Evelyn froze. The words didn't register at first. They hovered in the air, distant and unreal, like a language she didn't quite understand yet. Then the image appeared. Daniel? Standing beside a woman Evelyn had never met in person, but whose presence she recognized instantly from photos Daniel had never bothered to show her. Margaret Hale, early 40s. Composed, elegant in a way that didn't ask permission to exist. She stood close to Daniel, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her posture relaxed, assured. They were smiling. Not the forced smile of damage control, a real one. The anchor continued, unaware of the silence unfolding in that hospital room. Carter, who has worked closely with Hale on the firm's recent strategic expansion plans, is described in the company's statement as a long-standing, trusted partner, both professionally and personally. The announcement comes as markets react positively to news of a major incoming infrastructure investor, details of which remain under confidentiality. The words long-standing and personally echoed in Evelyn's mind. She looked down at her baby. So small, so warm. Completely unaware that the world had already shifted beneath its feet, Evelyn waited for tears. They didn't come. Her body was too tired, her heart too quiet. She reached out and turned the television off. The screen went black. The room fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Heavy, permanent. Evelyn leaned back against the pillows, staring at the wall while her child slept against her chest. Every moment of the past months replayed itself with new clarity. Daniel's distance. His phone always face down. His hesitation when she spoke about the baby. The way he had looked relieved, not conflicted, when he walked out of the delivery room. It wasn't sudden. It had been building. Margaret Hale wasn't just another woman. She was status. A shortcut. A door Daniel believed he had finally earned the right to open. Evelyn understood that instantly. She didn't feel rage. She felt something colder. Clarity. She adjusted her grip on her child, her fingers brushing over the tiny blanket. Her breathing slowed. Her thoughts sharpened. A memory surfaced, her mother's voice, steady and unshaken. Some people mistake proximity to power for ownership. Evelyn closed her eyes. Daniel had chased what he could see. Margaret had offered him a future that looked impressive. Neither of them had ever asked what Evelyn carried quietly. She looked down at her baby again and whispered, barely audible, "You didn't lose anything today." Her phone rested on the table beside the bed. It vibrated. Once. Evelyn didn't jump this time. She reached for it calmly, carefully, as if every movement mattered. The notification wasn't new. It was the same subject line from earlier, confidential deal confirmation, Northbridge Legacy Trust. The deal Daniel's new family was celebrating. It ran straight through her signature. This was the moment where grief usually begged for answers, but Evelyn no longer needed them. She already knew why. Now she needed to decide how. She opened the message, detailed attachments, timelines, voting rights. Confirmed controlling interests, including the position of the trust within Hale International's new capital structure. Evelyn read each page once, then again. When she locked the phone and set it face down, her expression had changed. The baby stirred softly, and Evelyn smiled for the first time, not out of happiness, but out of resolve. "They chose loudly," she whispered. "We'll move quietly." Outside the room, footsteps passed. Somewhere else, champagne glasses clinked and engagement photos were being shared. A marriage announcement was spreading, framed as ambition, success, a natural next step. None of them knew what had already been set in motion. The phone vibrated again, this time from a secure line she recognized. Evelyn picked it up. And for the first time since the delivery, she didn't hesitate. The silence was over. The silence was louder than the pain. It pressed against the walls of the hospital room, thick and unmoving, as Evelyn Carter sat alone in the dim light of the night. The machines hummed softly. The hallway outside whispered with distant footsteps. But inside the room, nothing moved except her breathing and the slow rise and fall of the newborn in her arms. It had been 3 days since delivery. Daniel had not come back. No explanation, no message, no hesitation-filled apology typed and erased. Nothing. Margaret Hale had not called either. That absence spoke louder than any announcement. The secure call she had answered after turning off the television, the one labeled with a discreet internal code rather than a name, had been from her lead counsel. He had seen the same engagement headlines she had, and he had not wasted her time with pity. "We can proceed whenever you're ready, Miss Carter," he'd said. "On the personal side and on the corporate side. You instructed us to wait until after the birth and final merger confirmation. Both are now complete." Evelyn had asked for a few hours. Now, in the quiet of the third night, her decision was done. She rocked gently in the chair, her movements small and careful, as if the world might break if she moved too fast. Her face was pale, her body sore, but her eyes were steady. People expected something else from a woman in her position. Tears, anger, collapse. Instead, there was quiet. A nurse stepped into the room briefly, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who had been assigned to Evelyn since the delivery. She glanced at the empty chair beside the bed, then back at Evelyn. "Still no visitors?" the nurse asked softly. Evelyn shook her head. The nurse hesitated, then adjusted the blanket around the baby. "You're doing well," she said. "Let me know if you need anything." Evelyn nodded, offering a small, polite smile. The nurse left. The door closed. The silence returned. Evelyn looked down at her child, studying every tiny detail as if committing it to memory. The baby's fingers curled instinctively, gripping the fabric of Evelyn's gown. That small pressure grounded her. "I'm here," she whispered again, more to herself than to the child. Her phone lay on the table, screen dark. She hadn't called Daniel, hadn't demanded an explanation, hadn't texted a single why. Not because she didn't have questions, because she already knew the answers. The phone lit up. She didn't flinch. "Seek your counsel," encrypted line. Evelyn shifted the baby carefully into the bassinet, making sure they were settled, then picked up the phone and answered. "Yes," she said calmly. The voice on the other end belonged to the same man who had walked her through every major legal step for the trust, Richard Vaughn. Late 50s, steady, loyal to structure, not emotion. "We've prepared what you asked for," he said. "I wanted verbal confirmation before we file." Evelyn watched her child's tiny chest rise and fall. "Proceed with the divorce petition," she said. "Full separation, no mediation, no joint statements. Keep it clean and factual." There was a short pause. "Understood," Richard replied. "We'll file under irretrievable breakdown. No reference to today's headlines unless court required." "That's fine," Evelyn said. "I'm not interested in spectacle." Richard's tone remained neutral. "And regarding Hale International and the merger?" Evelyn's gaze drifted to the window, where the night pressed its reflection back at her. Somewhere beyond the glass, Daniel was building a life that looked impressive from the outside. Somewhere else, Margaret Hale was confident she had chosen correctly. "We move forward," Evelyn said. "Initiate a formal governance review. Use the existing compliance concerns about executive conduct as the starting point, not the engagement. I want everything documented before we approach the board." "As you asked months ago, Laura has already flagged preliminary issues," Richard said. "She'll compile a full report." Laura Chen, independent corporate compliance specialist. Quiet, methodical. Hired months ago when Evelyn first noticed something off in Daniel's behavior and realized that, unfortunately, his personal choices might intersect with an asset she was responsible for protecting. "Good," Evelyn said. "Coordinate with Marcus. Marcus Reed, private investigator. Tasked long before the affair went public with tracing patterns around Hale's leadership decisions, travel, and unreported relationships. Not to destroy Daniel, to protect the trust. Nothing is to leak before we're ready," Evelyn continued. "I want board-level disclosures timed after the internal documentation is airtight. This is not about punishing them. It's about ensuring they can't claim ignorance." "Understood," Richard said. "I'll arrange a meeting once you're discharged. No urgency on our side, we move on your schedule." Evelyn's shoulders dropped a fraction. "Thank you," she said. "That's my job," he replied softly. "And for what it's worth, I'm sorry this is happening at the same time." Evelyn glanced at her child. "I'm not," she said quietly. "At least now I can make decisions without pretending not to see." The call ended. Evelyn placed the phone back on the table. Outside the room, footsteps paused, voices whispered. Someone laughed quietly down the hall. Life continued. Inside, Evelyn exhaled slowly. This was the moment she stopped waiting. Not for Daniel, not for Margaret, not for explanations that no longer mattered. She would not confront them in public. She would not chase, she would not rush. Silence, she knew, unsettled people more than anger ever could, especially those who believed they had already won. Evelyn lay back down, pulling the bassinet closer to the bed, her fingers resting lightly on her child's shoulder. "Everything I do now," she whispered, "is for you." The baby shifted, unaware of the decisions unfolding around them. Somewhere beyond those walls, plans were being celebrated. They had no idea what had just begun, and when the silence finally broke, it would not be gentle. The folder hit the table with a sharp, deliberate sound. Evelyn Carter didn't flinch. 2 weeks had passed since she left the hospital. The bruises had faded. The stitches had come out. The exhaustion remained, but it had changed shape, less like collapse, more like a weight she had decided to carry on purpose. She sat upright in a plain conference room with no artwork, no luxury, and no distractions. A space in one of the Trust's administrative buildings that most people walk past without noticing. On the edge of the table sat a small baby monitor, its tiny green light glowing steadily. In the adjacent office, Evelyn's aunt sat with the baby asleep in a portable cot, the monitor turned up just enough for Evelyn to hear if anything changed. Across from her sat 3 people who had known her long before Daniel ever did. The first was Richard Vaughn, her lead attorney, late 50s, calm voice. The kind of man who never rushed because he never needed to. His job, protect the trust, protect Evelyn, and ensure every move she made stood on unbreakable legal ground. Beside him was Laura Chen, a corporate compliance officer contracted through an independent firm, early 40s, precise. Her job, find patterns others missed and document them so clearly that denial became impossible. The third was Marcus Reed, a private investigator, quiet, observant, and unassuming. He had spent years tracing financial behavior, personal timelines, and professional misconduct for clients who needed truth more than comfort. Richard slid the folder closer to Evelyn. "Before we begin," he said evenly, "I want to repeat what I said on the phone. Once this starts, there is no quiet ending for them." Evelyn nodded. "There shouldn't be," she said, "not with what they're responsible for." Richard opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, calendar screenshots, travel records, and internal compliance notes stacked neatly, labeled carefully. Laura spoke first. "Daniel Carter violated conflict of interest and disclosure policies," she said, her tone factual. "His personal relationship with Margaret Hale predates their formal declaration to Hale International's board by at least 6 months." Evelyn's expression didn't change, Laura continued, pointing to a document. "These emails show private meetings outside approved channels. These calendar logs confirm overlapping trips booked under separate pretexts. And these internal messages," she tapped another page, "come from staff members who were asked to rearrange meetings and conceal changes in Margaret's schedule." Marcus leaned forward, slightly. "We also confirm that Daniel began receiving informal access to information about promotion decisions shortly after the relationship appears to have started. Not illegal on its own, but when paired with undisclosed involvement in strategy sessions, it's a pattern." Laura nodded. "In compliance terms, it's enough for a formal investigation, especially now that your trust is the controlling investor through the merger." Evelyn listened without interruption. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of pages turning and the faint hiss of static from the baby monitor. Richard folded his hands. "Corporate compliance inside Hale flagged anomalies months ago," he said, "but they weren't in a position to push without investor backing." Evelyn met his eyes. "Because I asked you to hold them," she said. "Yes," Richard replied. "You were finalizing the merger, and you were pregnant. You didn't want to destabilize the company during either process. That wasn't weakness. That was strategy." Evelyn had delayed action not to protect Daniel, but to protect thousands of employees, multi-country contracts, and the child she was carrying. She refused to let personal betrayal destabilize a structure she was responsible for. Marcus slid another document forward. "There's no indication Daniel or Margaret knew you were the controlling party behind the new investor," he said. "As far as they're concerned, you're just Daniel's wife." Evelyn nodded once. "That's what I needed them to think." Laura glanced at Richard, then back at Evelyn. "You understand that once we formally notify Hale's board, Margaret and Daniel will connect the dots." "Yes," Evelyn said. "By then, the dots will already be documented." Richard closed the folder halfway. "So," he said carefully, "we're at a decision point. If we move forward, we file the divorce petition already drafted as a matter of record. We submit a formal compliance report to Hale's independent directors. We request a governance review and investigation into executive misconduct." He paused. "It will be public, eventually." Evelyn didn't hesitate. "It should be," she said. The words landed cleanly. She took a breath, then spoke with the same steady clarity she had used during the merger calls. "File the divorce petition today," she said. "Serve Daniel at his registered address, not his office. No joint PR, No negotiated statements. I'm not interested in optics. Richard made a note. Submit the compliance report, she continued. Full documentation, including evidence that internal staff raised concerns and were ignored. Laura nodded once, already thinking through the structure. And inform Hale's independent directors, Evelyn said. Not Margaret, not Daniel. The board first. Let them decide how to handle their executives, knowing exactly who is now watching. Silence. Followed not uncertainty, but respect. These were the people who never left. They had stayed when Evelyn chose quiet over spectacle, when she married without announcement, when she lived smaller than she needed to. They understood something Daniel never did. Power didn't vanish when unused. It waited. Richard closed the folder completely. There is one more thing, he said. He slid his phone across the table. Someone asked to speak with you, he added. The screen lit up. Former board member, Hale until Evelyn accepted. The voice on the other end was older, weathered by decades of decision-making. I heard you're behind the new Capitol, he said simply. Yes, Evelyn replied. A pause. They always underestimate the quiet ones, he said. They confuse restraint with weakness. Evelyn looked down at the table. They made their choices, she said. I'm just making mine. Yes, he said. And you're doing it the right way, through process, not chaos. The call ended. Evelyn exhaled slowly. She gathered the documents, sliding them back into the folder with care. Every piece of evidence had been earned. Every step justified. There would be no gaps. No rushed decisions. No emotional missteps for anyone to exploit. She stood. Richard looked up. Timing on the board disclosure? Evelyn paused at the door. Not yet, she said. File what needs to be filed, serve what needs to be served, then give them a little time. Time for what? Marcus asked quietly. For them to get comfortable, she said. It's easier to see who people really are when they think the worst is already behind them. She left the room without looking back. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, sharper. She checked the baby monitor. Still quiet, still safe. Evelyn walked forward, her steps unhurried, her mind already several moves ahead. Somewhere else, Daniel was planning a future he believed was secure. Margaret Hale was confident she had chosen well. Neither of them knew that every document they feared already existed. And when the moment came, it would arrive not with anger, but with undeniable truth. The room shifted the moment the agenda changed. Daniel Carter felt it before anyone said a word. He sat upright at the long boardroom table, shoulders squared, confidence carefully arranged on his face. Margaret Hale sat beside him, calm and composed, her presence radiating authority. This was her territory. Glass walls, polished floors. People who stood when she entered and waited when she spoke. Daniel believed he belonged there now. The chairperson cleared his throat. We'll be rearranging today's agenda, he said. There's a compliance item that needs to come first. That wasn't unusual. But the way he avoided Daniel's eyes was, a guest stood from the far end of the table, Laura Chen. Daniel recognized her vaguely as external compliance. One of the people who handled the boring audits and regulatory reports he never had time to fully read. She placed a small remote on the table and turned toward the screen. Daniel leaned back slightly, relaxed. Margaret crossed her legs, unbothered. The screen lit up. Dates appeared first, then timelines, then names. Daniel's name. Emails followed subject lines, timestamps, meeting notes. Calendar overlaps highlighted in red. Travel records aligned too neatly to dismiss. Quiet conversations suddenly given shape. The room went still. Daniel's smile faded. Margaret's posture stiffened. Laura spoke evenly, without accusation, without emotion. Our independent review identified repeated breaches of conflict of interest and disclosure requirements, she said, specifically involving CEO Margaret Hale and executive Daniel Carter. A murmur rippled through the room, then died quickly. Daniel straightened. This is a misunderstanding, he said, his voice sharper than he intended. Our relationship was disclosed. Laura tapped the remote. More documents appeared. Disclosure occurred after key strategic decisions in which both of you participated, she said calmly. By policy, that constitutes a breach. She clicked again. Internal messages appeared from junior staff. Notes about last-minute cancellations, pressure to move meetings, unexplained changes that lined up with their private trips. Margaret's jaw tightened. The chairperson folded his hands. "Mr. Carter," he said slowly, "given the findings in your relatively recent senior appointment, you are suspended from your position effective immediately, pending a full investigation." The words landed like a blow. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. This couldn't be happening. He had done everything he was told. He had stood beside Margaret at the announcement. He had chosen this life. Margaret stood abruptly. "This is overreach," she said. "You're reacting to personal matters that have nothing to do with performance. It has to do with governance," one of the independent directors said quietly, "and we now answer to someone who takes that very seriously." Margaret reached for her phone. It buzzed the moment her fingers wrapped around it. Her expression changed. Once, twice, then color drained from her face. She scrolled faster, her confidence cracking as messages stacked one after another. Investor questions, a notice from General Counsel, a reminder about newly registered voting rights tied to the recent merger, an internal note from the chairperson, timestamped before this meeting. Northbridge representative confirmed. Final authority present through trust executor Evelyn Carter. Her grip tightened. Daniel watched her, confusion turning into dread. "Margaret?" he whispered. She didn't answer. Laura spoke again. "In addition to the disclosure breaches, the board has been informed that the new controlling capital behind the merger has requested enhanced governance standards." The screen shifted. A new diagram appeared. Ownership structures, layers of trusts, final authority highlighted in bold. At the end of the chain, one name sat at the center: Evelyn Carter, Executor, Northbridge Legacy Trust. Daniel's breath caught. The room erupted into a softer kind of shock, people leaning forward, whispering, rereading what they were seeing. Margaret stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open. "That's not possible," she said flatly. The chairperson shook his head. "It's not only possible," he said. "It's already effective. The trust's attorney confirmed the documentation with us days ago." Laura continued, addressing the room. "Not just Margaret. The investor you've all referred to as the infrastructure fund is, in fact, a generational trust. Miss Carter is its final decision holder. She signed off on this merger. This disclosure is being made under the confidentiality carve-outs Miss Carter approved for board and governance purposes only," Laura added. "Her role remains sealed in all public filings." Daniel's mind reeled. Evelyn? Quiet, pregnant, soft-spoken Evelyn? His wife. The woman he walked away from on delivery day. Everything he had chased, the future, the status, the security, had already been in his house, sitting across his dinner table, asking him if he was okay, and he had walked away from it. Margaret sat back down slowly, her authority evaporating in seconds. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't check it. The chairperson's voice was final now. "Miss Hale," he said, "given your position, we must initiate an independent review. You will remain CEO for the moment, but certain decision-making powers will be temporarily reassigned. You're to cooperate fully." Margaret's hand shook. Daniel felt exposed, small, naked in a room that suddenly felt too bright. The chairperson glanced at him. "Mr. Carter, security will escort you to collect your belongings. You're on paid suspension until further notice. Do not contact staff regarding this investigation." The meeting adjourned. People stood. Conversations sparked quietly. Phones came out. The story was already moving inside controlled circles now, but moving all the same. Daniel remained seated. Margaret stood without looking at him and walked out through a side door, followed by legal counsel. He didn't follow. He stared at the darkened screen long after it turned black. Finally, he stood and walked toward the exit. Outside the boardroom, the hallway felt unfamiliar, cold, unforgiving. The same building he had once dreamed of impressing now felt like it was spitting him out. His phone buzzed. He almost didn't look. When he did, the name on the screen made his chest tighten. "Evelyn," he answered, without thinking. His voice came out rough. "Was it real?" he asked. "All of it? Us?" There was silence on the other end. Then her voice steady, distant, but not cruel. "Everything that mattered was real," Evelyn said. "The problem is what mattered to you." He closed his eyes. "I need to see you," he said. There was another pause. "We'll talk," Evelyn replied. The call ended. Daniel stood there, phone pressed to his ear, realizing too late that the question he should have asked years ago, who she really was, had finally been answered. And now, he would have to face the only person who truly knew what he had lost. Daniel Carter nearly ran into the security barrier before he realized where he was. The sharp voice of a guard snapped him back into his body. "Sir, you need clearance to go past that line." He stopped short, chest heaving, tie loosened, jacket hanging open like he had forgotten how to wear it. The building lobby was quiet, muted, discreet, the kind of place no one walked into by accident. Behind the glass doors of a private meeting room stood Evelyn. She was holding their child. For a split second, panic surged through him, not fear of losing anything material, but fear of facing the only person who had ever loved him when he had little to offer but himself. "Let him through," Evelyn said calmly. The guard glanced at her, checked his tablet, then tapped a button. The barrier unlocked with a soft click. Daniel walked in slowly, every step heavier than the last. He didn't rush her. He didn't raise his voice. Whatever confidence had once filled his posture was gone. What remained was exhaustion, the kind that comes after pretending for too long. Evelyn stood near the window, her back straight, her expression unreadable. She looked slimmer than the last time he'd seen her, the physical traces of pregnancy already fading, but something else about her had solidified. Not colder, clearer. Daniel stopped a few feet away. For the first time since the boardroom, there were no witnesses who mattered. "Was it all real?" he asked. The question slipped out of him raw and unguarded. Not accusing, not defensive, just tired. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She adjusted the baby in her arms, waiting until the child settled. Only then did she look up at Daniel. Her eyes weren't cold. They weren't warm either. They were clear. "Everything except what you thought mattered," she said. The words landed gently and crushed him anyway. Daniel swallowed hard. His throat burned. "You never told me," he said, "about any of this, the trust, Hale, the merger." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "You never asked," she said. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. He replayed the years in his mind, the times she'd changed the subject gently, when conversations veered near her work. The NDA references, the "it's boring legal stuff" answers he had never pressed against. He saw himself choosing not to notice the quality of the documents she kept locked away, the occasional late-night calls from numbers labeled only oversight. He had mistaken quiet for emptiness. Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out a thin envelope. She held it out to him. Daniel stared at it without taking it. "Divorce petition," she said evenly. "Filed last week. You've already been served at your registered address. This is a copy." He took the envelope with shaking hands. "You planned this," he whispered. Evelyn didn't deny it. "I prepared for it," she said. "There's a difference." There was no anger in her voice. No satisfaction, just truth. Daniel laughed once, broken and breathless. "I thought I was choosing power," he said. "I thought, if I stood beside Margaret, I'd finally be someone." Evelyn looked down at their child, then back at him. "You chose proximity to power," she said calmly. "You never checked who actually held it." That hurt more than any accusation could have. Daniel lowered himself into a chair, suddenly unable to stand. His shoulders sagged as the full weight of it pressed down on him. He had been suspended. His inbox was full of legal notices, not congratulations. Margaret hadn't returned his last few calls. And now, sitting in this quiet room, he realized what hurt the most. He had lost the only person who loved him when he had nothing but potential and good intentions. "I didn't leave because of you," he said softly. "I left because I was afraid of staying small. I thought you were safe, like you'd always be there." And she was. He trailed off, searching for words. "Visible?" Evelyn offered. "Loud?" He nodded. "I thought if I chose her," he said, "I'd finally be standing where things mattered." Evelyn nodded once. "I know." That was it. No lecture, no rage, no attempt to make him feel worse than he already did. That restraint broke him. Daniel looked up at her, eyes wet. "Is there any chance?" "No," Evelyn said gently. Not harsh, not cruel. Final. The baby stirred in her arms. Evelyn shifted slightly, instinctively protective, her entire body aligned toward the future rather than the past. Security cleared his throat from the doorway, a subtle reminder that the meeting had a time slot and he was still on a visitor pass. Daniel stood slowly. He held the envelope tighter, as if it might dissolve if he loosened his grip. "I never really saw you," he said quietly. Evelyn met his gaze one last time. "That doesn't make you evil," she said. "It just makes you late." Daniel nodded. There was nothing left to say. He turned and walked toward the exit, each step echoing in the quiet room. At the door he paused, hoping against reason that she might call his name. She didn't. The door closed. Evelyn exhaled slowly and leaned back against the window. The city lights reflected faintly in the glass, but she wasn't looking at them. She looked down at her child. Her hands were steady. Her heart was quiet. For the first time since the hospital, she wasn't reacting to loss. She was standing inside choice. Outside, Daniel disappeared down the hallway, carrying consequences he could no longer outrun. Inside, Evelyn remained still, composed, unfinished. The question now was no longer about him. It was about what came after. And whether peace would feel as heavy as victory. The pen slipped from Evelyn Carter's fingers and hit the table with a soft click. For a moment, the sound echoed louder than it should have, as if the room itself needed to hear it. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with the sudden realization that there was nothing left to sign, nothing left to authorize, nothing left pending. It was over. Across from her sat Richard Vaughn, calm as ever, reading through the final page once more. He had been with her through every stage, quiet instructions, careful timing, controlled disclosures. His role was nearly complete now. "The court has granted the dissolution," he said evenly. "It's finalized. No appeals pending. Custody and support follow the agreement we drafted." Evelyn nodded. No smile, no dramatic sigh of relief, just acceptance. Richard slid the folder toward her. "If you need anything further, you know how to reach me," he said. "I know," she replied softly. He hesitated. Hale International has accepted the governance reforms. Margaret has stepped back as CEO officially for health reasons. The board appointed an interim leader from outside her inner circle. Daniel's suspension converted to termination with severance. They're positioning it as restructuring. Evelyn listened quietly. "You didn't ask us to push for more," Richard added. "Some people would have." "I asked you to protect the trust," she said, "not to destroy the company. Too many people work there who did nothing wrong." Richard nodded once, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Then we've done what we needed to do." He stood, nodded again, and left the room without ceremony. The door closed. Silence followed, but this time, it felt different. Evelyn looked down at her child, sleeping peacefully in the stroller beside her chair, unaware that a chapter of their life had just ended. She adjusted the blanket, her movements slow and deliberate, as if every second mattered now in a new way. Time had passed since the boardroom confrontation. Weeks had folded quietly into each other. Headlines had come and gone. Articles about leadership transitions at Hale International had briefly trended and then been replaced by newer stories. Daniel's name faded from press releases. Margaret Hale retreated from public view, the sharp edge of her certainty dulled by forced distance. Evelyn never followed the details closely. She didn't have to. She had set boundaries in motion. The rest belonged to process. She wheeled the stroller out of the building and into the open air. The day was clear, unremarkable, almost ordinary. There were no cameras, no waiting crowds, just a sidewalk, a breeze, and the sound of distant traffic. She walked slowly, not because she was tired, because she finally could. Her life no longer revolved around waiting for a man to come home or an institution to do the right thing. She had done what her mother taught her, protected what she carried, even when love tried to blur the lines. Evelyn passed people who didn't recognize her, didn't know her name, didn't realize the scale of the decisions she'd been part of. That anonymity felt different now. Not like hiding, like choosing. She stopped briefly beside a small park, looking down at her child, who stirred and opened their eyes for a moment. Evelyn smiled, then small, real, unguarded. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, "not because of what I control, because of what I refuse to repeat." Later that evening, back in her home, Evelyn stood in front of a closed door. It was the door to the room that had once been theirs. The bed had been stripped. The wardrobe was half empty. A few of Daniel's forgotten things sat in a box by the wall, waiting for a courier service to collect them. She rested her hand on the handle, but didn't open it right away. Instead, she closed her eyes. She thought of her mother, of the long table, of that quiet warning that had shaped everything. If people know what you carry, they will only love the weight, not you. Evelyn understood that lesson differently now. She turned the handle and stepped inside, not to reclaim the past, but to release it. The room smelled faintly of dust and old cologne. She moved slowly, picking up small objects, deciding which were just things and which carried meaning she no longer needed to hold. A framed photo of their wedding, simple, quiet, taken before either of them knew exactly how much power she held or how much fear he carried. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she wrapped it carefully in newspaper and placed it in the box. Not thrown away, not displayed. Put away where it belonged in the past, documented but no longer directing the future. The door closed behind her. Light from the window framed her face, calm and steady, no longer bracing for loss or betrayal. Just breathing, just standing in the life she had chosen to protect. There was no celebration, no applause, just peace. And somewhere in that stillness, a truth settled gently into place. Some people lose everything, chasing power they can be seen standing next to. Others gain everything by knowing when to walk away from those who never bothered to see them at all. Evelyn looked down at her child one last time before turning off the light. Tomorrow would come, and this time, it would be built on her terms. The story didn't end with revenge. It ended with freedom. I hope you enjoyed watching this story as much as I did creating it and telling it. If it spoke to you, like, share, and drop a comment about the lessons you've taken from Evelyn's journey and Daniel's choices.